Hello everyone, my name's Pete and I've got mixed feelings about early access. The question of whether or not it's a good thing is one I'll put to one side for a while, and instead I'll talk about a few games that I absolutely loved despite acquiring them in an unfinished state. Before I begin, thanks to the Patreon supporters who make me think about making videos enough to actually keep doing it. If you want to throw $1 a month into the bucket, then there's a link in the description, but I'd suggest buying junk food instead. At the start of my list I have two titles that are no longer in early access, but the majority of my time spent with them was prior to the 1.0 releases. Game number 1 is Workers and Resources Soviet Republic. To call this game a city builder is both correct and underselling it at the same time. Unlike other city builders, Soviet Republic is a much more intricate experience. It boasts a very in-depth simulation that tasks the player with providing clean water, electricity and sewage to the people. And whilst you might be thinking, but Pete, other games have that too, you must understand that here, you'll also be responsible for the delivery of chemicals to the water treatment plant, coal to the heating plant and workers to both, making sure you're using the correct capacity pipes and electricity cables to supply the right amount of each of those things. There's a very unforgiving learning curve to this game and it really will take some serious time to get anything remotely close to functional. I spent about 500 hours with it before I could get a population of more than 1,000 to survive the winter whilst keeping the bank balance up, and even more after that to be able to run multiple cities. I play almost exclusively in realistic mode, which means that all construction must be completed by manually moving resources to the construction sites along with workers to get anything done. This is the slowest way to play the game but by far the most satisfying, and I recommend that everybody tries it at least once. The modular difficulty settings mean that players can learn at a reasonable pace, and there's an unlimited money mode where you can't fail. So if you'd rather concentrate on connecting the many industry chains and build something beautiful without the stress of death spirals caused by bad road placement, then that's also an option for you. With 700 hours spent on building Soviet republics, I think I can safely say this won me over in early access. Game number 2 is one that needs no introduction, and so it doesn't get one. If you haven't heard of Factorio by now, then you're probably not interested in management games. This one has been out of early access for a long time now, and fairly recently got its Space Age DLC, which I own but I'm yet to try out. If I was to try and explain all there is to do in this game, then I'd be here all day, so instead I'll just show you the tech tree. The game has an end goal, which is to launch a rocket off the alien planet you're on. That is, unless you own the DLC, in which case launching a rocket is the tutorial before a whole load of new options open up. Despite being able to accurately sum up the experience as just balancing inputs and outputs, one of my personal favourite things is the surprising amount of room for creativity. With some belt weaving and smart train networks, you can really make something that's pleasing to look at. Or you can make a semi-functional eyesore, if you prefer. But just make sure you protect what you've built from the angry natives or they'll be sure to ruin your day whether it's beautifully built or not. I lost easily over 200 hours in this before its 1.0 state came around, and since then the amount of game on offer has way more than doubled. Factorio is a great example of something that's easy to learn and difficult to master. It contains plenty of difficulty settings for easing new players in, so if for whatever reason you haven't tried it, then don't be afraid of images like this and start making stuff like this. Third on my list here is a train simulator like no other, and that sounds like a massive claim, but there really isn't much out there that does what Railroader does. On the surface of it, it looks like a train sim with an overly simplified control system, and that's because this isn't a locomotive simulator, it's a railroad simulator. The game starts you out with one working locomotive and one that needs repair. You have 2 passenger stations and a handful of industries to serve, all of which can be managed with one small locomotive and just an hour or 2 of effort. The beauty of Railroader, however, lies in the progression system. For comparison, if we look at something like Train Sim World, here you're given a route to drive or a couple of tasks to complete, and upon doing so you're kicked into the next task without any continuity. Here in Railroader, this section of railroad is yours. You need to fuel and maintain your locomotives, serve your passengers and industries to keep your reputation up, and when you feel ready for it, you can expand. The progression is handled by milestones, which are delivery tasks which need to be completed to repair bridges, extend lines and add rail yards and fueling stations along the way. The full length of track covers over 50 miles of rail with a branch line and more industries than you can reasonably service on your own. Most of the gameplay is a shunting puzzle as you untangle and arrange your freight for optimum delivery, and after 2 or 3 expansions, you can quickly find yourself swamped in work, which is perfect for the next feature, and that's multiplayer. I'm not sure what the limit of players is per server, but I've seen as many as 20 playing at once. With most of the line being single track with passing loops, communication is key. But the feeling of having a living railroad when playing with friends is something I haven't experienced anywhere else, and it might just be my favourite way to play. This one is still very much in early access and it shows in places like the scenery more than anything else, but if you're interested in the operations of a railroad and want to have a sense of ownership and progression in your train sim, then this is highly recommended. I'm sitting at just over 300 hours of playtime now, and in all honesty, I'd be perfectly happy if there were no further updates. Keeping up with the train theme, because in case you haven't guessed, I like trains, I bring to your attention Mashinky. This one has been in early access for a very long time and in development for even longer, but despite this, the updates are still coming. I could defend it all day by saying it's a one-man show behind the scenes, but I do think there's such a thing as too long in early access, and that line has definitely been crossed here. With that being said, I absolutely love it. It's clearly made as a love letter to Transport Tycoon and borrows a lot of elements from it to create something familiar, yet still entirely its own. The aesthetic might not to be everyone's liking, but if you're an open TTD fan and you're looking for something a little less ancient in appearance, then I think this one might be for you. My favourite way to play is having technology progression locked behind a price tag and unlocking new things at my own speed. When you advance eras, which you can have happen through time progression if you prefer, you'll gain access to more powerful vehicles as you might expect, but you'll also see new industries and towns pop up that can either enhance your network or cause a huge rebuild. There are also multiple currency types that can only be generated by servicing the different industries, and this is a great way to encourage a diverse network. There are some cool difficulty options like the One Depot challenge, which requires careful planning and a fully connected network of road and rails, and the option to stop trains from being able to magically flip around at stations. If you're coming from transport fever, then get ready to fight with far less convenient block signals, which can be a pain at first, but as a trade-off, Mashinky offers you the chance to walk in the world in first person. You can ride in the passenger cars or even the coal hoppers, and if you're really into getting your hands dirty, you can drive the train yourself. As someone with a strong fondness for logistics simulation games, Mashinky ticks all the boxes I need and more. The longer this stays in early access, the less hope I have of it ever leaving it, but even if it doesn't, I'm just happy it exists. The final game I want to show you is something that I struggle to put into a category. There really isn't much out there that compares to Big Ambitions. It's a management game at its core, with some life sim mechanics, and it's way more fun than it has any right to be. You're dropped into the streets of New York with a bit of money, and your task is to turn that into as much money as possible. The game starts out very labour intensive as you rent a retail premises, buy the shelves to display your stock, and then work the cash register. Trying to find the time in between to buy your stock from the wholesaler, clean the store, and remember to eat and sleep is the hard part. But working alone is tough, and all work and no play isn't good for anyone. For a better balance, you'll need to hire employees, maybe take out a few loans and get a few businesses running until you have a bigger passive income. A large portion of the game eventually becomes managing your staff, tweaking schedules, seeing to training needs and fulfilling employee requests. As you gain notoriety, other business tycoons in the city will start to take notice of you and will take steps to drive you out of business. The way the game scales from running through the streets with boxes in your arms to making a few phone calls to open a new business happens so naturally. Going from micro to macro management is hard earned and makes the grind all the more satisfying. I haven't reached the end game yet and I'm 50 hours in, but it looks like you're able to buy out all the businesses except the bank, and honestly that's just great. I don't know what to expect from a full release of this, but I'm already sold on the game as it is. And that's my list. So, is early access a good idea? I've got a feeling that the answer isn't as straightforward as yes or no. There are a lot of things on Steam for sale that are barely games because of it, but at the same time, if it wasn't there, I might not have discovered these gems. Let me know if there's anything you've played in early access that turned out to be an absolute banger, and maybe I can take a look at those too. Another thanks to the Patreon supporters for being irresponsible with money, and thanks to you as well for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.